This is Stephanie with Hightower Stitching. Today's video is Up the Ladder, an easy piecing strip quilt. Before we get started into the video though, I wanted to show you where we were going to go. This is a strip quilt that runs horizontally. And like we all know, every quilt does not have to be a multitude of pieces. And sometimes after you've worked on a quilt with a lot of small pieces, you're ready to do something that's just a little bit different. And so I thought I had found that one, and then I found some challenges that went with the new one. So let's go and look what happened. This was an easier quilt in ways, this quilt top. For example, it just ran 38.5-inch strips going across. I said nothing to that, but before I could even get there, I had to go get my fabric, and it was going to take 4 different colors. And every time I get ready to try to do something like this, I can get 2 colors that really go together, but that third and that fourth one just throw me. So I just started. I took a little stack of my fabric, and I laid out a couple of the colors that I liked in that stack, put that stack back, and then went to the next color to see if anything went with it. And this time that ended up being a great way to do this quilt, and you'll see that again later when you see the fabrics. So I finally ended up with 4 fabrics that I really liked, and I started cutting. Now on these, because it was 38.5 inches, I cut a cross from salvage to salvage. Now that gives you a little bit of give because that grain is stretchy, the threads run, the way the threads run. If you're worried about your machine pulling, then I would take and probably run your pieces along the salvage, which would not have any stretch to them, and get 38.5. Now I did run them about 39 inches. I added a little extra to it. For this one, I took my strips and I sewed the first strip on, and then I sewed the second strip on, pressed it, opened the seams, and then I tried to decide, was I going to go and pick up the next 2 pieces and sew those together and just do them in pairs and put them together. That's one way you can do it. Sometimes my pieces get mixed up, and no matter how hard I try, so I said I'm just going to add them one at a time. And I always started from the same end, and that end would always be sort of together, wouldn't have to be trimmed. And then when I finished the whole thing, then I could trim off the rough edge on the right hand side before I put on the border. But if you're interested in it, these are the dimensions, and these are the way the colors go, and it can really be fun because you could just make it a bunch of different colors, or you could go with a theme, and then you'll see that when you finish, you'll have strips that are 2 inches, 4 inches, and 6 inches. So here's an example of where I've sewn 2 of the strips together, and I'm ready to do the third one, and I've started it at the same end, and I pin it all the way down because I've got the foot that will pull the fabric through, but even there I want it to stay together, so I would pin it all the way down, and then it makes it also go fast. You pin in the front so that you can run your stitches all the way down, and then come and press the seam. Then I like to open my seams. Once I got that panel together, I was really surprised how big it was, because by the time you take 4-inch strips and 6-inch strips, it doesn't take long to make something that's nice and long. And it actually, I had it laying across a sofa yesterday, and it went across the back. So I had added 2 borders to it, and that brings us to your border edges. And you may have seen this before, but I try to do something that maybe you might not have seen, but it might just refresh your memory. So if I had my base of my quilt and I'm going to work on my borders, I've got to think about what size. Well, they used a 4-inch border, and another 4-inch border. So that's what I think I started with. But to do your border, don't measure along the edge of the quilt. Measure through the center of the quilt for your side pieces, and then go ahead and add those on. And then for your bottom and your top, you're going to measure through the center of the quilt. And you've got your sides on, so go ahead and measure all the way across there, especially if you're not going to have cornerstones, those blocks that sit in the corner, and then you'll have the distance across. And the reason you do this, and I had this happen to some quilts, was that when I got finished and I'd put the edge on there, it was kind of wavy when I got the binding put on. And so I discovered that the edge was distorted, and if I had measured through the center, then that wouldn't have been such a problem. It doesn't happen all the time, but it's aggravating when it does. So let's say that you're going to put the cornerstones on there. So measure through the center and just measure the quilt part. Don't do the new border you added there. And then go up, cut your squares. Now if you've got a 4.5-inch border to start with, then your blocks on the corners are going to be 4.5 inches. And what I did is I sewed the first square on one end of the fabric. And then I went and sewed it to the quilt. And when I got to the other end, I folded the top border back about 1/4 of an inch right at the corner so I'd know where to hook on the block. And then I'd finish attaching it to the top. And that works pretty well. As you look at the finished quilt top, there are some seem to be anchor strips, the dark green. And you can see how I mixed different things together. I've got some red colors, some red with green in it, and then I've got some cream with green in it. And everything just seemed to flow to make the quilt. Then when I made the edge, I added another cream with a green, and then added the red, and it's about a 2.5 inch. Then it became time to decide what I was going to do. Well, I don't think I was going to hand stitch this because this was sort of for fun. So I was going to do it on the sewing machine. And I started thinking, oh, wait a minute, 2 inches I'm used to doing sashing. That's not bad. 4 inches I've done some, but what am I going to do with a 6-inch strip? So when I was watching TV, I started playing with it. I actually drew out different ones and tried to see what I might like. Now, I didn't mean I was going to do them, but that gave me some ideas. And so I started with a 4-inch strip, and I took and followed the directions on a leaf pattern that I had in the book, and that's where I'm going to go next. Okay, the first thing that I did to start on this one was I just made a reference line that I wanted to follow, and even in the first time I might have done another one to go off on the side, and I just used the pen that will go away with air, and I've had the air erase, and it's done very well over a lot of projects. And this is already set up to go if everything works well. And this is like 2 years, but only a year of working hard. But this is nice because leaves are not all the same, and if some of my leaves are wonky, it doesn't matter. And I'm just going to follow that branch, and then anytime I want to branch off I can, because there I had made that other, and I'm going to start, and I'm going to go all the way through there. Now, what am I going to do with the 6-inch blocks? I don't have a clue. I might chop them in half horizontally and put 2 patterns in there. But this has been a different kind of a challenge, getting those strips to go together so nicely, and then trying to decide what I was going to do for a pattern on the outside. It's hard to capture that quilt right now, but it's going to make a great lap quilt. I've already tried it on the sofa, and I think that might be where its new home is going to be. This is Stephanie at Hightower Stitching. I hope you enjoyed this video. So if you want another challenge, and this is a different kind of a challenge with the strips, here's the pattern. Grab your stacks of materials and see if you can put 4 together.